Welcome to episode 11 of Conspiracize Me. I am going to be continuing on with the theme of the afterlife and tackle a very interesting topic, I think, of whether or not visions of heaven and hell are real, or as real as people today say that they have. There are many movies made on this topic, many books have been written, bestsellers, and people will eat this up because I think it's natural for any one of us to be curious as to what is on the other side. We can't see it. The majority, most, if not all, have not seen it, or we have dreamed of it, had visions of it, we think. But is it so? Are visions of heaven and hell actually legitimate? So that some people have a message that they are given by the spiritual world to bring back here to the physical world to warn people, to encourage people, to comfort people, whatever it might be. There are a myriad of reasons why anyone might be interested in what is going on in the afterlife. And, you can't get to the afterlife until you die, which is a very somber, very perhaps scary thought. A lot of people don't really want to touch it, but we all know it's coming. It is the most inevitable outcome that is also perhaps the most uncomfortable to accept. So, that being said, I am going to go ahead and tackle our visions of heaven and hell real. Just looking back at it from a grand scope here. Heaven is where good people go, and hell is where bad people go. Good in heaven, bad in hell. That is the extreme. Here on earth, we have good, bad living together and all sorts of in-betweens. But heaven and hell, you can't get more extreme than that. Heaven, you continue to get good, and hell, you continue to get bad, you continue to get worse. Potentially, you're at your worst all the time. I don't know. It's a scary thought to even think about being bad all the time and even potentially getting worse and worse for, get this, eternity. Right? We have a limited set time. We understand what time is. We have a concept, a frame of mind around time. We know that the human lifespan is, less than 100 years or so. We know that it's inevitable that our time will run out. We don't have a concept of eternity. And so when these visions are given, when these visions are had of heaven and hell, the visionary is being shown a glimpse of a moment in time that is not part of time. How long were you there? You could have been there literally for 5 minutes, but because there's no concept of time, I wonder how long you were actually there. How long did it feel like when you were there? It is a mystery, so I'll start with this. I do know that the Bible talks about visions of heaven and hell. I'm going to start there. Here's what ChatGPT says. Paul and the third heaven. The most mysterious first-hand account comes from Paul, the apostle, in 2 Corinthians 12. So this is coming from the Bible. He says, he knew a man, almost certainly himself, who was caught up in the third heaven, taken into paradise, and heard things not lawful or impossible to describe. The strange part is Paul is unsure whether it happened in the body or out of the body. That ambiguity is fascinating because it sounds eerily similar to modern near-death experience language. And Paul, the apostle, actually had a lot of near-death experiences. He was stoned, he was shipwrecked, he was whipped. Any one of those times, he could have had something like this. Why the third heaven? Ancient and Jewish cosmology often viewed heaven in layers. The sky or atmosphere is number one, and number two is the outer space celestial realm, and then number three is the dwelling place of God. So Paul says he's seen the dwelling place of God. Paul gives almost no visual detail. The experience seems overwhelming, sacred, and beyond language itself, which is kind of nuts, kind of scary, kind of crazy. The fact that heaven or hell, one of two places, you could find yourself in the afterlife, but there's no language that is even capable of describing what heaven is like. I mean, paradise, but doesn't that seem a little unsettling? If you are going to walk into a situation where language does not even come close to explaining, I wouldn't feel too settled. That restraint actually makes it feel more psychologically authentic to many readers. And then you have Jesus and Lazarus and the rich man. So one of the clearest afterlife depictions comes from Jesus Christ in Luke 16, again from the Bible. A poor man named Lazarus dies and is carried to Abraham's bosom, while a rich man ends up in torment. Key imagery: conscious existence after death, separation between the righteous and the wicked, flame, and anguish. These are all terrible things that hell is known for, especially flame, definitely anguish. Inability to cross between realms, and awareness of loved ones still alive. And can you imagine that? You're aware of people still alive. You can't cross between the two. That's probably part of the anguish. Is your anguish, is the flames, but then even having to think about people still alive? At what point does that end, by the way? I mean, you got to think that life, the Bible talks about it, coming to an end, life coming to an end at some point, like Judgment Day, coming to a head, and the ultimate separation. So at what point do you stop having a glimpse of the loved ones that are still alive, and you have nothing to distract you from the flames that you're literally in? And is it literal? The rich man begs for warning to be sent back to his family. So the debate is this: was this a literal glimpse of the afterlife? Was Jesus talking about actual afterlife reality, where there's a flame, where there's fire, where there's anguish, where there's pain, where there's sadness, where there's deep hurt? A parable using familiar imagery, or a symbolic teaching about justice and repentance? People fiercely disagree, but it absolutely shaped Western concepts of hell. And then of course you've got the book of Revelation. Heaven, judgment, and the lake of fire. The most cinematic imagery comes from John of Patmos in the book of Revelation. So here's heavenly imagery. A throne surrounded by rainbow-like radiance. This is some of what is difficult to comprehend, to describe in the language that we have available to us. Living creatures covered in eyes, angels crying, holy, 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 streets of gold, crystal seas, and a new Jerusalem descending from heaven. And then you've got hell, judgment imagery, which is complete opposite. You've got the lake of fire, Satan bound and later cast down, smoke rising forever, books opened at judgment, and a second death. Revelation is deeply symbolic and apocalyptic, which makes interpretation difficult. Some read it literally, others see metaphor and spiritual archetypes. You have Isaiah's vision of God in Isaiah 6, where he sees God enthroned, the temple filled with smoke, seraphim with 6 wings, beings crying, holy, holy, holy. So you've got smoke, which is here a common theme between what is in the throne room of God and then what is in hell. What is the smoke? Is it different? Is it the same? Is the smoke in the throne room of God a sacrifice to God? And is the smoke in hell also a sacrifice to God? Isaiah immediately believes he will die because he has seen the divine. So there you go. It's unsettling. That terror before holiness theme appears repeatedly in biblical visions. You have Ezekiel's vision. Ezekiel has perhaps the strangest vision in the Bible. He describes wheels within wheels, eyes everywhere, glowing metal-like beings, fire, lightning, and crystalline expanses. Modern conspiracy culture often links this to UFOs, interdimensional beings, or ancient advanced technology. I mean, that seems very, very out there, but it's in the Bible. The Bible is a book that you read to understand life, the meaning of your life, who God is, revelation unto all mankind. And here we have a very difficult and unsettling depiction of the spiritual world. And it's hard to understand. Could it be literal? It's still visually pretty wild. Daniel's Ancient of Days. Daniel describes fiery thrones, rivers of fire, heavenly courts, books opened in judgment. This becomes foundational imagery for later apocalyptic visions. And then you've got Jesus' descriptions of hell, or Gehenna. Jesus frequently references outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, eternal fire, destruction, and Gehenna. Gehenna here refers to a real valley outside of Jerusalem associated with death and impurity. So debates continue over whether Jesus meant eternal conscious torment, annihilation, symbolic destruction, or something else entirely. You still have debates raging as to what Jesus meant. Was it literal or was it symbolic? That's the two major things. Here's the other thing: literal versus symbolic. Is heaven literal and hell symbolic? If you're going to say that heaven and hell are symbolic of what? So what happens when you die? Just nothing? You're living for the possibility and then you die and nothing actually happens? That's kind of cruel, don't you think? We also know that there's a literal opposition of forces in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm. We know it, we've experienced it. There is good and there is evil. They are literal things. Hurt, pain, joy, happiness, comfort, fear, good and evil. Both of those are literal. So why would it be all of a sudden that in the afterlife, good continues to be literal, but then evil becomes symbolic? So it must mean that evil continues to be literal. And if in life we know that there are opposites, we know then that it must be true that heaven and hell are both as literal gets. And if that's the case, if heaven is eternal, then that must mean that hell is eternal. Kind of a scary thought. Anyway, we've got more here. The thief on the cross, Jesus tells the repentant thief, today you will be with me in paradise. There are also unusual resurrection and death border stories. Saul consulting Samuel's spirit, Jesus raising Lazarus, people appearing after Jesus' resurrection, Stephen seeing heaven opened while dying. He claims to see heaven open and Jesus standing at God's right hand moments before dying. One of the biggest themes is indescribability. So a recurring pattern in biblical visions is that witnesses struggle to describe what they saw. So instead of here's a precise map of heaven, the Bible often gives symbols, overwhelming light, creatures beyond comprehension. You've got music, fire, fear, peace, judgment, and awe. All of that ambiguity is part of why interpretations explode into theology, mysticism, conspiracy, and speculation. So that being said, good and evil are literal. So when it comes to heaven and hell being good and evil, those must be literal, because if it is symbolic, then that is cruel. The God of the Bible does not show himself to designate an idea of heaven and hell, but certainly not make it a literal place. And if there is a literal good place in heaven, then there must also be a literal bad place of hell. If heaven is eternal, then hell is eternal as well, unless you consider, if you're thinking opposites, why is it that heaven can't be an eternal good and hell be an evil that gets annihilated? If you say that the bad must exist because you can't have good without bad, how is it so that God existed without any evil? It was always good, and there was no evil until the devil. I mean, this is not a theology episode at all. All right, so this is where I'm going to take a turn, and outside of biblical examples, what heaven and hell visions are there, modern or maybe even not so modern, and are they real? Because I think that's a big conspiracy. There are thousands of reported visions of heaven, hell, angels, demons, tunnels of light, judgment, dead relatives across cultures and centuries. Are these experiences glimpses of a real spiritual realm, or is the human brain generating convincing illusions at the edge of death? So it's either something that's real, the spiritual world is making itself visible, or the mind is tricking us to believe we saw something, and then you see something, you share it with somebody, and you get them to buy in, and then all of a sudden it's a craze. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Why some people believe these visions of heaven and hell are real. Number one, the similarities are weirdly consistent. Many near-death experiences report leaving the body, observing doctors from above, tunnels, beings of light, profound peace, life reviews, encounters with deceased relatives, and reluctance to return. Hellish experiences often include darkness, isolation, screaming, despair, fire imagery, shadow beings, overwhelming guilt or judgment. People across cultures repeatedly describe structurally similar experiences. So number two, we have some experiences include verifiable claims. Some experiences claim they saw conversations in operating rooms while clinically unconscious. Described objects they supposedly could not physically see, so this is an out-of-body experience. Cases investigated by researchers like Raymond Moody and Pim van Lommel are often cited. The argument, if consciousness can function while the brain is severely impaired, maybe consciousness is not fully produced by the brain. Okay, that's interesting. If while the brain is shut off, you can still have an out-of-body experience, then maybe the brain is not all there is to your animation and experience of life. Maybe you can still think, feel all the things you need to be like a thinking person without a brain. That's kind of wild to think about. Okay, number three, people often come back changed. Many experiencers report loss of fear of death, increased spirituality, less materialism, personality changes, greater compassion, depression from returning to ordinary life. I know that there are some people who watched the first Avatar movie and were depressed that they had to go back to their normal life. If your idea of fun is turning blue and riding on the backs of dragons, more power to you. I'm good, man. I'm afraid of heights, and I certainly don't want to be blue. The brain does strange things under extreme stress. At the edge of death, you have oxygen dropping, chemicals surging, perception distortions, and then you've got temporal processing, which breaks down. Neuroscientists point to hypoxia, temporal lobe activity, DMT hypothesis, REM intrusion, hallucinations, and memory reconstruction. So the skeptical argument is this: a dying brain may create experiences that feel more real than reality itself. I think that's a viable option. So you've got the brain that continues to work when you're under extreme stress, when you're unconscious, unconscious. You've still got these connections firing. Your brain is still working, but it's not working properly. You're unconscious, so your brain has to like kind of figure things out for itself, maybe even create its own reality based on what you've given it sensorially. Yeah, I think that's a fair argument to say that the brain is so strong, which isn't the brain stronger than like any supercomputer that we've created? Is that wrong? The brain is a very, very phenomenal thing. And for us to think that it's not capable of having these crazy experiences. But interesting enough though, what if the brain itself is a spiritual thing? What if it has spiritual components so that maybe it can be unlocked to be outside of time? I don't know. Brains are capable of astonishing illusions already. Here we go. Dreams, psychedelics, psychosis, sleep paralysis, disassociation. Okay, number 2, culture shapes the experience. A Christian may see Jesus, angels, heaven, hell, because that's what you're already thinking about. That's your framework of the world. That's your mindset. That's already what you've put in. You've already been thinking about it, constructing what these things could look like. A Hindu may report Yamraj, reincarnation imagery, cosmic bureaucracy. And then you've got a secular person may simply experience light, love, floating consciousness. The brain interprets death through cultural expectation. No matter what your experience of life is when you're alive, there is a reality outside of what you see life to be when you have your full consciousness, and then when you go partially unconscious or maybe fully unconscious, your brain kind of takes your framework of the world and then shows you reality in the spiritual realm based on your framework of this world that you're in. But basically, your mind, your brain, can only work with the tools that you've given it while you're fully sentient, while you're fully awake and aware and alive. Your brain will then use those tools that you've given it to try and construct for you the reality of the afterlife. And so maybe that's why people come back and say, I've been to the afterlife and here's what I saw. And then somebody else says, I've been to the afterlife and here's what I saw. Some people just saw light, other people saw angels or demons or whatever it might be. But your brain is just using the tools, the framework, the language that you gave it, because it can't use language that you haven't given it. Number 3, memory is not a camera. Many experiences are reconstructed after trauma. Here's the real question. Why do humans repeatedly encounter transcendent realities under extreme conditions? That question remains unsolved. Even many skeptical scientists admit consciousness itself is still poorly understood. One thing worth being careful about is a lot of modern heaven and hell stories become sensationalized. You've got books, you've got viral testimonies, YouTube rabbit holes, emotionally manipulative fear content. Some stories later unravel or change dramatically over time. Yeah, you've got what you said when you woke up, and then you've got a changing story some years later. Does any vision of heaven or hell stand a test of time? Or the afterlife in general? Discernment matters. So the strongest cases tend to be modest, emotionally sincere, internally consistent, and less commercially polished. Ironically, quieter stories often feel more credible than cinematic ones. There you have it. I think it's possible for someone to see or be given a glimpse, a vision of heaven, of hell, and your mind is going to use the language, the tools that you have given it, that you have equipped yourself to use in order to try and explain what is going on in this vision that you're having, why some people have it, why some people don't. I don't know. I can see your spirit being genuinely confused. Like, do I go now? Do I leave the body? Like, what am I supposed to do? Am I being called to the spiritual indefinitely? Is there a, like, why am I still here? Why is there, like, this string holding me to the body and yet I'm not in the body? Does the spirit have a brain? Does it use your brain? Does it have its own brain? Does it have components of the physical brain? Is there a spiritual brain that right now is in our physical brain? It's all speculation. The one thing I do know is that we will all get to a point where we are completely separated from this physical nature as we know it and are seeing things in the spiritual realm for what they really are. And at that point, whether or not you have the words to describe it at that time, the truth of the matter is we'll all be at the same place at the same time, and we'll surely figure out then whether or not some of these stories have been hoaxes or have been true. That being said, I do wish you well in this physical world, and I hope that we are all prepared for the world to come. Thanks for watching.